Come over here quick. Jackson just called me out of the blue and said he threw Mom out of the house. He wants me to deal with her now, I explained, feeling confused and surprised. What? That's awful. He really kicked Mom out. Come and see for yourself, Jackson urged. Oh, when I let her take Dad's memorial tablet. Why would he be so mean? Now that there's no money left from Dad's stuff, he doesn't want Mom around anymore. He sees her as a problem. I couldn't believe it. It turns out Dad had debts, and after paying them off, there wasn't any money left for us. I had no idea about this, and to make things worse, Jackson and his wife had been living in our family home all this time. It felt incredibly unfair. It's getting dark soon. If you don't come to pick her up, Mom will be sleeping on the streets. How could you be so cruel? I will never forgive you for this, Jackson, I said, feeling upset. I don't need your forgiveness. That's just too harsh, Jackson replied, hanging up without listening to me. He didn't answer any of my subsequent calls. When I finally got through to Mom, she confirmed everything Jackson had said. Angry at him and worried for Mom, I had no choice but to drive over to where she was. Let me introduce myself. I'm Lily, I'm 27 years old, and I'm in a hurry. 3 years ago, I married Mason, who's also 27, and we've been living together since. At first, we lived with my parents in our family home, but 2 years ago, my brother Jackson and his wife suddenly moved in. They claimed the house was too crowded with us there, so we had to leave. Jackson, who's 8 years older than me, has always been selfish, but his marriage seems to have made him even worse. Our family home, where I grew up, is a big house with a lot of space and land. It's been passed down from my grandfather. There's no reason we can't all live comfortably together. I wasn't happy about the situation and tried to talk to Jackson about it, but my husband, who doesn't like arguing, convinced us to leave. Around that time, my dad got sick with liver cirrhosis, and it was already pretty bad. I wanted to be there for him in his last days, but I couldn't. His illness got worse quickly, and he passed away a month ago. It's really hard not knowing that my mom must be feeling even worse than me, dealing with my brother treating us this way right after losing Dad. It's just sad. An hour later, when we got to our family home, Mom was sitting sadly on a suitcase in the garden. The front door was locked. Jackson had taken her keys. I used my keys to unlock the door and went inside with Mom. Jackson and Olivia were lounging on the sofa, watching TV like nothing was wrong. What's going on? How did you get in? Jackson asked, acting like he didn't know what was going on. I used my key to open the front door. Isn't it obvious? I replied, feeling frustrated. It slipped my mind. Leave your key, take the old lady, and go. This isn't funny. How can you be watching TV after kicking your own mother out of the house? Besides, if the house remained even after Dad's debts were paid off, Mom has a right to live here. I shot back, getting more and more angry at Jackson's attitude. I stood in front of the TV. Mom has a right to inherit this house. If you can't live with her, you should be the one to leave, Jackson, I said firmly. Shut up. This house is mine. Dad gave it to me when he was alive. Don't act smart without knowing anything, Jackson retorted defensively. What do you mean? There's no way Dad gave this house to you, Jackson, before he died, Mom interrupted, looking confused and shaking her head. Seeing our confusion, Jackson smirked and stood up from the sofa, pulling out an envelope from a room in the back. Look at this. What's this? It's proof that I inherited this house, Jackson declared proudly. The envelope contained documents proving his inheritance, prepared by a legal writer, and his real estate ownership certificate. He explained that the property had been transferred to his name a month before Dad passed away. Mom and I were stunned as we examined the documents. Why would Dad do something like this? I sighed, gazing at his picture. Why would Dad hand over the house to Jackson without talking to Mom about it? Because I'm his favorite, obviously. I convinced him that Mom would get the house after he passed away, so he gave it to me while he was still alive, Jackson bragged. That can't be. I refused to believe it. Wake up and see the truth, Mom argued. No matter how many times we looked at the document, the property was indeed in Jackson's name. All this fuss over a house, my mom muttered in disbelief. Is there nothing else left for Mom? No other inheritance? Be grateful that the debts are paid off. This can't be happening. You're not just worried about Mom. You realize there's no inheritance for you either, right? Jackson sneered. The bank card he handed over had only a few dollars on it. I wasn't expecting Dad's inheritance, but it was a shock to find out he left me nothing. This is too harsh, I thought. To make things worse, Olivia was laughing at us, enjoying our misery. Just leave. You poor people don't belong here, she mocked. Jackson and Olivia pushed us out of the house forcefully. Ouch, that hurts. Mom cried out as she fell and scraped her hand. Blood started to trickle out, so I quickly wrapped it with my handkerchief. Tears of frustration rolled down my cheeks. Seeing me upset, my mom gently wiped away my tears. Her eyes were filled with sadness too. Mom, our place is small, but you can stay with us, I offered. But I don't want to bother Mason. I'll find somewhere else to stay, Mom protested. Don't worry, I can't just leave you like this. I'm going to call Mason right now. Just wait, I assured her. Wiping away my tears, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed my husband's number. Mason answered after a few rings. Hello? Mason, I'm sorry to bother you out of the blue. Mom has been kicked out of her house, I explained. As I told him what happened, Mason listened attentively, though he seemed a bit unsure. I held my breath, waiting for his response. Our apartment is pretty small compared to Mom's house. It might not be the most comfortable, Mason started, but I don't mind. Bring your mom over. We've been helped out in tough times too. We should help each other when we can. Thank you so much, Mason, I said gratefully. My husband is such a kind person. He couldn't leave someone in need. We quickly took Mom to our apartment, and from that day on, we lived together. But living with 3 people in our small apartment was tight. We didn't have enough money saved up to buy a house yet, but maybe moving to a slightly bigger place in the future would be a good idea. It was heartbreaking to see Mom squeezed into our small apartment. As my husband and I browsed through property listings on the computer, Mom's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she dropped a bombshell. Why don't we move to my Highlands condominium? She suggested. Hold on, what Highlands condominium? I asked, completely surprised. Mom went on to explain that my wealthy grandfather had been a big spender, leaving my grandmother with no choice but to sell their farmland to keep up. As for Dad, he was also known for spending a lot. And besides the house, we didn't have many assets. Worried about our future, Mom had wisely invested her earnings from before she got married in real estate. My husband and I were floored. It turns out, Mom not only owned a condominium in the Highlands, but also managed an apartment building, earning a significant income from her investments. I can't believe it. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner, Mom apologized. Anyway, the management company just called. There's an opening in the Highlands condominium. We can move in next month. What do you think? She proposed. We couldn't refuse such a generous offer. Plus, the Highlands condominium had 3 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, all just a 5-minute walk from the station. It was much more comfortable than our current situation. Thank you, Mom, but we might only be able to afford the same rent as we do for the apartment. I expressed my concern. You don't need to worry about that. We have to do things properly even if we're family, my mom insisted. Oh, I need to let the landlord know we're moving out. Seeing my husband and me smiling with happiness, Mom's face lit up too. Time flew by as we got ready to move into our new home at the Highlands condominium. Before we knew it, 2 months had passed since we settled in. As I was getting ready to go shopping, I was surprised to see the Jackson couple suddenly appear at the entrance of the condominium. Why are you, a poor person, living in the Highlands condominium? Did you come into some money or what? Olivia sneered. Of course not. The Highlands condominium has always belonged to my mom, I replied firmly. Both Jackson and Olivia were shocked. What? They exclaimed together, staring up at the tall building. I couldn't help but laugh at their confused and silly expressions. Jackson's face turned red with anger. That deceitful woman. I can't believe she kept this from us while pretending to be poor. My mom never said she was poor. You just assumed that, Jackson. Plus, she inherited a big house. What's wrong with that? I argued. That's not the point. Don't shout here. It's rude to the other people living here. And how did you know I was here? Jackson demanded. Jackson said that when he couldn't reach Mom, he tracked her down using her phone's location. Olivia explained. Why are you trying to contact Mom now after kicking her out? I bet something mean again, I accused. Regardless, if Mom is here, I want to see her. Let me in now. Jackson demanded. You must be kidding. If you hurt Mom again, I couldn't stand it. If you have something to say, tell me, I insisted. But they kept pushing to see my mom without saying why. The Jackson couple seemed quite flustered. Weren't you two living comfortably in your big family house, just the two of you? I questioned. It's none of your business, Jackson snapped. Fine, if you don't want to tell me, that's okay. I have to go now. Bye, I said, trying to walk past them. But Jackson suddenly grabbed my arm tightly. Ouch, let me go, I protested. Just call Mom. Absolutely not. I'll call the police, I threatened. But Jackson just scoffed at me. There's no way the police would come for a simple family argument. Even if they did, there's no way you could sue me for just grabbing your arm. Feeling defeated, I stayed quiet. Fine, I'll tell my mom, but only if you tell me why you're here, I relented. The utility bills for that house are ridiculous. Just for the AC, the electric bill is $500. This is no joke, Olivia explained. Their old traditional style house had more than 8 rooms, so it was no surprise that utility costs were high. But even so, a $500 electricity bill seemed a little steep. It was a particularly hot summer, so they probably overused the AC. I thought you would have known that from the start. How would we have known? Mom used to pay the bills. Jackson scratched his head frantically as Olivia fumed. There's no way we would have known. Do you know the property tax for that house is $5,000 a year? Olivia exclaimed. What? I can't believe you didn't know. Why would an old house like that cost so much? How are we supposed to pay that? Jackson protested. Our house is old and has a large yard, so it's only natural that it would cost a lot to maintain, I pointed out. I also mentioned a reality to the Jacksons that they might not have realized. And apparently it costs more in taxes to give away property while you're alive than after you pass away, I added. Wait, is that true? Jackson asked, stunned. I didn't know before, but now I know. My mom told me all this, I said, watching as the Jacksons looked really surprised. Olivia got mad and blamed them, saying, it's your fault for not doing your homework. Then they started arguing right in front of me. Jackson said, we worked hard to get Dad to change the name on the house. And now this is too much. I can't believe Dad did something sneaky like this. He even said it would be better to give it to me than to Mom. That's not fair. I realized, feeling shocked by my dad's actions. Taking advantage of the situation, Jackson said something surprising. You can have the house. Let's trade it for this Highlands condominium. Confused, I responded. What are you saying? The house isn't mine. It belongs to Mom. Please talk to Mom for me, I beg you. I'll just pass on your message, nothing more. What on earth are you even talking about? Jackson snapped, feeling foolish for even talking to them. I gave up on shopping and started walking back into the Highlands condominium through the entrance. But the Jacksons tried to follow me, which surprised me. I'll sue you for trespassing, I warned them. You just said that wouldn't be a legal problem, Olivia shot back. It seems like they won't understand until they face a real consequence, I sighed in frustration. I called out to the management office next to the entrance. Excuse me, could you please call security? Someone who doesn't live here is trying to get in. Wait a moment, the security guard, who was always on duty at the Highlands condominium, rushed over immediately. With the big security guard standing in front of them, the Jacksons looked startled. Once again, I warned them to avoid a repeat of the situation in the future. I didn't call the police just now because you only grabbed my arm. But if you try to use force or come back to the Highlands condominium, I will really call the police, understand? Don't make us do that. If I see you again, I'll report it, so go back to your mansion from Dad. Got it? I told them firmly. Looking scared of the police, the Jacksons quickly backed off. I returned to my apartment and told my mom about what happened with the Jacksons. But why did Dad let Jackson inherit the house? I asked, feeling sad. My mom smiled. Dad must have had a reason when he let Jackson inherit the house. He didn't want to trouble me or you, Lily. Even though Dad wasn't very interested in money, he cared a lot about me. Remember, he always said he loved you, Lily, so much, she added. Really? I was so happy to hear that my dad cared about me so much. When my mom heard about the house from Jackson, she muttered, "Is he going this far?" Because she realized he had given Jackson a serious punishment, even though Jackson was always selfish. You knew how Dad felt, Mom? I asked, surprised. Of course, dear. We've been together for 38 years. I know what he's thinking without him saying a word. Besides, Jackson never took care of Dad when he was sick, my mom explained. I misunderstood Dad. I feel terrible. I want to apologize, I admitted. Don't worry, Lily. Your feelings are reaching Dad in heaven. The ones who should worry are the Jacksons, who these days would buy a big, high-maintenance house like that. I bet they'll struggle to find a buyer, my mom said with a smirk. After a while, it became clear that my mom was right. The Jacksons couldn't handle the house on their own and put it up for sale but couldn't find anyone to buy it. They kept living there even a year later. Amidst all this, Olivia accidentally started a grease fire while cooking chicken in the house. It quickly burned down, and since they didn't have money for fire insurance, their life was going to get even tougher. Well, while I understand their problem, it's not my concern, I thought, feeling thankful for my life in the Highlands condominium. Living in the Highlands condominium was amazing, and I could only feel grateful to my mom. I've been paying her rent every month, but it seems she's been saving it to make sure we won't struggle in the future. Every day is peaceful and happy as I live with my wonderful mother and caring husband. Visiting my father's grave, I promised him that I would always repay my mother's kindness. My younger sister, Lois, called me just before our mom's funeral. She hadn't replied to any of my messages, so I was surprised to hear from her. She told me she'd just come back from Hawaii with Keith and brought me some chocolates. I was really upset because she hadn't bothered to respond to me earlier, so I ended up yelling at her in front of everyone at the funeral. I said something hurtful about her taking my husband, which was a terrible thing to say. Lois was confused and just asked, "What?" before I hung up on her. I turned off my phone and tried to calm down as I sat with the rest of the family. My name's Emily, and I just turned 38. I grew up in a family of 4. My parents, my sister Lois, who's 6 years younger, and me. My parents were pretty strict, especially with me being the oldest. But they always spoiled Lois because she was charming. Whenever she wanted something, she'd flash a smile and say, "Emily, I want this," and I usually give in. Unfortunately, this didn't change even as she got older, and she became quite a troublesome sister. Dad passed away 8 years ago from an illness, and about 6 months ago, Mom got a terminal diagnosis. She was in and out of the hospital. I married Keith, a colleague, 2 years ago and moved out to an apartment near my office. For the past 6 months, I've been driving an hour each way to take care of Mom between work. Lois moved back home and quit her job a year ago after a breakup. Even though she lived there, she kept pushing the caregiving responsibility onto me, saying I was better at it. So I took a month off work to look after Mom. But despite my efforts, she passed away 2 days ago. And where was Lois? She'd gone off to Hawaii a week before Mom's passing. I tried to convince her to stay, but she wouldn't listen. At the funeral, after the priest finished speaking, friends and family started paying their respects. It was touching to see not just relatives, but also many of Mom's friends there to grieve. Some colleagues from my company came too. "I'm sorry for your loss," one of them said. "Thank you. I really appreciate you letting me take time off to be with my mom in her final days," I replied. "He's actually my father-in-law, the president of the company where I work. He's been really understanding about everything I've been going through and has supported me a lot." "But where's Keith? I haven't spotted him here yet." "Well, he's been overseas on a business trip since last week, and I haven't been able to reach him," I explained. "Oh, I see. I'll ask the sales manager about it," I said, trying to figure out where Keith was. Keith and I work in different departments because of the big company he runs. He's always busy with sales and often away on business trips. I tried to understand, but it was hard not having him here during such a tough time. I was worried about handling everything alone, especially with no contact from him or my sister. Meanwhile, my father-in-law made the effort to be there for the funeral. Despite his busy schedule, his support meant the world to me, and it almost brought me to tears. I had to hold him back as we rode in the limo to the crematory with the rest of the family. When I turned my phone back on, I found almost 30 voicemails, mostly from Lois. "Answer your phone. You can't just make up some ridiculous lies because you're upset that I took Keith from you," she yelled in her messages. "She took Keith from me?" I questioned, trying to recall if Lois had hinted at something like that during her call before the funeral. But I was too busy dealing with the mourners to fully grasp what she was saying. Lois and Keith having an affair? That couldn't be true, could it? I felt a sudden rush of anxiety and confusion. Was Keith really on a trip with her? As I hurriedly checked the voicemail, I found several messages from my husband. I'm so sorry, but you're strong. You can handle this on your own. But Lois, I need to be there for her. We need to end things, he said in a message that felt like it came from a soap opera script. Hearing those words, I couldn't help but mutter, I wish I hadn't heard that. Finding out that my husband and sister were having an affair and enjoying themselves in Hawaii during my mother's funeral felt like a cruel blow. You need to come right away if you want to say your final goodbye to Mom. We're already heading to the crematory, I reluctantly informed my sister over the phone. That's not funny. Stop lying. You're just bitter because I took Keith from you, she shot back. But it's true. You must be upset about losing your husband. Yes, he's the next company president and wealthy. I get it, Emily, but there are lies and then there are terrible lies. You're an adult. You should know better, she retorted. I never thought I'd hear that from you, I replied. I was surprised though. I had no idea that you and Keith were cheating. I could almost hear the smirk in Lois's voice. She'd always loved playing tricks on me since we were kids and would laugh when I fell for them. I sighed in frustration. Anyway, this isn't the time for this. If you want to say your final goodbye to Mom, come now, I urged. I'm tired of that lie. So why do you have cheese? Lois asked abruptly. Ask his father, I replied, throwing the question back at them. I could hear them discussing on the other end, probably caught off guard by me bringing up his father. Eventually my husband, who seemed to be with Lois, took the phone. Emily, is that true? He asked. If you don't believe it, do whatever you want. I'm hanging up now, I stated firmly before ending the call. Soon we arrived at the crematory. It was my last chance to say goodbye to Mom, and my mind was in turmoil with the whirlwind of emotions from the past few days and the pain of losing my mother. I felt lost and overwhelmed, tears streaming down my cheeks. Seeing me like this, one of my relatives comforted me, saying, Your mom would surely be grateful to you, Emily, for taking such good care of her until the end. I stood in front of my mother's casket, bidding her my final farewell. Mom, thank you for everything. I'm going to miss you so much, I whispered. Just as her casket was being carried out for cremation, there was sudden commotion. Wait a minute, where's Mom? My sister and husband burst in, their voices loud and frantic. Lois tried to hold onto the casket as it disappeared behind the doors, but they closed abruptly, leaving her wailing in despair, with Keith looking stunned. We should move along now. We're disturbing others, I said, trying to keep calm. Why didn't you tell me, Emily? I didn't get to see Mom at the end. It's your fault. Lois accused me, her voice filled with anguish. My fault? I echoed, bewildered by her accusation. Absolutely. If it was this serious, you should have told me earlier. You never said anything. Lois accused, her voice filled with frustration. I couldn't help but feel exasperated. How many times had I explained our mother's health condition to her? Every time she'd just brush it off, saying, I don't know how to handle any of this. I'll leave it to you, Emily. That's right. This all happened because you didn't explain how serious Mom's condition was. It's your fault, Lois continued to blame me. Even Keith, my husband, joined in, pointing fingers at me. I stared at them in disbelief. Then what were you two doing all this time? I demanded, my voice rising with anger. They gasped, finally falling silent. If you can't say it, I will. You were off on a fun-filled romantic getaway in Hawaii together, weren't you? As the relatives murmured, clearly taken aback by the unfolding drama, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their disbelief. For so long, whenever they asked, what's wrong with Lois? Or isn't Keith coming? I've been making excuses for them, trying to shield them from judgment. Mom, I'm sorry. I really wanted to say goodbye to you more peacefully, I whispered in my mind, seeking her forgiveness. Gathering my resolve, I knew I had to clear the air. When did this affair start exactly? You both knew I was on leave caring for Mom, right? I was struggling, asking for help countless times, but all you did was have fun together, didn't you? I questioned, my voice tinged with frustration and hurt. Enough. It's all your fault, Emily. You didn't keep Keith close enough. Lois snapped back. What's that supposed to mean? I demanded, my patience wearing thin. You need to prioritize your husband more. He's been feeling bored at home because all you talk about is work and caregiving. Poor Keith, Lois chided, her words dripping with disdain. Oh, so that's what he said, I retorted, shooting a glare at Keith, who quickly averted his eyes, unable to meet my gaze. Emily, you managed to marry a wealthy future company president, but you've become conceited. That's why he was drawn to me. It's always been like this with you, Lois continued, her tone accusatory. In reality, Lois had a history of stealing my boyfriends back in high school and university. The only time she didn't succeed was with Keith because she was already with her own boyfriend then. What a disappointment. From now on, I'll be with Keith and become the future president's wife. So break up with him, Lois demanded. Fine, you can have Keith. I'll divorce him, I declared, my resolve firm. By then, I was beyond caring. When I decided to marry Keith, I had no clue he was the president's son. He worked at a regional branch and later joined my department at headquarters. Keith was charming, easygoing, and quickly became part of our team. As we grew closer, I developed feelings for him. We started dating, and when he proposed, I was thrilled. It wasn't until I visited his parents' house that I learned his father was the company president. It was quite a shock. So promise me you won't come back later begging to avoid the divorce, Keith pleaded. I won't do that, I assured him. Are you really sure about leaving me? He pressed. Yes, I am, I replied firmly. If you leave me, no man will want to marry a workaholic like you. You know that, right? He warned. I'll live my life as I please on my own terms. But for today, please just say your final goodbye to Mom properly, I pleaded with him. Keith and Lois exchanged knowing looks, smirking as if they had won some sort of victory. The relatives watched on, their brows furrowed, clearly disturbed by the unfolding situation. I'm truly sorry for the scene you all witnessed. I apologized to my relatives, feeling a pang of guilt. I heard Lois whispering to me, always playing the good girl. I hate this about you. I've tolerated a lot from her because she's my younger sister, but I've had enough. I won't consider her family anymore. I'm divorcing Keith, and now I feel like I have no family left. All I can do is prepare myself for that reality. I bit my lip, feeling the weight of it all. 2 weeks have passed since then. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Keith, packed up everything, and settled into a new condo near the office. I've even put my parents' house up for sale. There's nothing left tying me to the past. Lois has moved in with Keith as I moved out. Keith and I have already finalized our divorce papers and submitted them to the courthouse. I'm sure they're happily starting their new life together now. Now that I'm done with Mom's paperwork, it's time for revenge. Watch over me, Mom, I whispered to her portrait, a determined smile on my face. Enjoy your honeymoon phase while you can, you too. The next day, as I went back to the office to sort out my job reinstatement, my phone buzzed incessantly with voicemails piling up. Hey, what's happening? We're divorced, right? Why am I being asked to pay $30,000? Keith's voice sounded confused and agitated. Worried they might show up uninvited at my new place, I suggested meeting at a local diner to discuss. Once we sat down, Keith was furious, practically frothing at the mouth. I got some legal document. What's going on? We're already divorced, aren't we? He yelled. Exactly. I'm just as confused, Lois chimed in, equally puzzled. I had instructed my lawyer to claim $40,000 from Keith as my share of the property and $30,000 from Lois for her portion of our mother's medical care coverage. The documents must have arrived at their places. It was something they should have anticipated, but evidently didn't. I was exasperated. You just need to pay what you owe, I insisted firmly. That's not fair. Don't think you can get away with this. I've suffered a lot of emotional distress. Should I sue you for that too? Keith threatened angrily. Emotional distress? You cheated, plain and simple. So pay up, I retorted, refusing to back down. They fell silent, perhaps realizing they couldn't argue with the law. Then, after a pause, Lois turned her gaze towards me. So Emily, it's all about the money for you after all, she remarked coldly. Fine, I'll let Keith handle the payment. If I borrow from my dad, we can easily come up with the $70,000. Keith, I know you don't have any savings. Lois, are you really okay being with a guy who has no money? I interjected. Keith will become president soon. Then he'll be wealthy. It's just a matter of time, Lois replied confidently. Oh, Lois, you're after the money too, aren't you? I couldn't help but comment, feeling a mix of disbelief and disappointment. No, I have plenty of love. Dad's been saying for a while that he'll retire at 65. So in 2 years, I'll be president, Keith asserted confidently. Really? That would be something, I replied, trying to hide my skepticism. I'm definitely going to be president. I'm his only son, Keith affirmed. I wonder. I couldn't help but chuckle, my doubt seeping through. I can't believe this. Has she lost it? Lois muttered, clearly annoyed. But the real revenge plan I had in store was just getting started. Keith, you've been taking a lot of time off work, citing family funerals, right? I asked casually. Well, my mother-in-law is family too, Keith replied, trying to justify his absences. That's true, but the company is aware of what you've actually been up to, I continued, watching Keith's expression carefully. Huh? What do you mean? He asked, clearly confused. Do you know that your father attended Mom's funeral? I dropped the bombshell, knowing I had purposely kept this information from Keith and Lois. That was you, Keith realized, his eyes widening in shock. You didn't do any caregiving at all. You have the nerve to lie about taking family leave for that, and you've gone off on several business trips with Lois instead, right? I've reported that too. I stated matter-of-factly. How did you find out? Keith stammered, clearly caught off guard. Lois has been posting photos on social media, showing where she's been and when, and there were a few pictures with you in them. Quite shocking, I revealed. Huh? You knew about my social media? Keith asked, surprised. It's the same account you had back in high school. Of course I'd know, I replied. Lois shifted uncomfortably, and Keith seemed stunned by my revelations. Wait, does Dad really know everything? He asked, looking bewildered. Just as my mother was family to you, your father considered her family too. So of course he knew about the funeral, as it should be reported to the company. Even after the funeral, he reached out to me several times to check on me, so I reported everything to him. And he's quite furious. He also made it clear he has no intention of making you the next president, I explained, dropping another bombshell. Huh? But I'm his son, Keith protested, disbelief written all over his face. He said he doesn't recall ever mentioning our company follows hereditary succession. He also made it clear he doesn't need a son who would act so disloyally. I informed them, relishing their shock. So Keith won't be the president? Lois asked, her voice filled with disbelief. As I watched their pale faces, I decided to push them even further. And just so you know, I'll be taking over as president starting next month. Huh? Keith and Lois exclaimed simultaneously. In fact, I've just received the official notice from the president and my superiors at the company. I've been formally appointed as the new president, I announced confidently. There's no way they'd make you president, Keith protested, clearly rattled. If you think it's a lie, why don't you call your father and ask? I challenged him. Keith hurriedly dialed his father's number, while Lois, his new wife, watched anxiously. So Emily is really going to be the president? It's true? So I won't become the president's wife? If I had known, I wouldn't have taken you from Emily. Lois lamented, her voice tinged with regret. But you just said you loved me, Keith muttered, stunned by the turn of events. That was considering your assets, I clarified firmly. What did you say? Keith's voice rose in confusion and frustration. Unable to tolerate their squabbling any longer, I stood up. If you two want to argue, do it somewhere else. And I'll be expecting the payment. Thank you. Wait, please don't leave me. Please, sis, support me, Keith pleaded desperately. I evaded their outstretched hands and walked away. Eventually, the couple ended up divorcing. Keith was demoted by his father and eventually resigned from his job. Now he works multiple part-time jobs every day to pay off his debts to me. Lois, on the other hand, is reportedly working at a bar at night. Initially, she seemed to be doing well, but she fell victim to a bad situation after being deceived by a dishonest man. Meanwhile, I've become the president. Admittedly, it's for a small company that operates as a subsidiary in the caregiving industry, established based on the proposal I submitted during my caregiving leave. However, the caregiving sector is projected to grow in the future, and I'm determined to excel.